Good afternoon and welcome all once again. So, we are going to discuss literature goes global, though it seems that virus went global faster than literature did. Literature goes global, post pandemic digital literature. We seem to love the word post so much that we apply it everywhere. So, it's post pandemic digital literature, and I welcome uh, my celebrated panelists, beginning with Rakshanda Jalil, literary historian, translator, and critic. Uh, Shortly, Mr. Amitav Roy will be joining us. He runs Setu Prakashan. And I welcome Rajesh Singh, a senior journalist and author. Vaishali Mathur, a senior publisher at Penguin. We also have Lipika Bhushan, an author who heads Market My Book, a leading digital publishing and marketing company. And Sudipto Das, an engineer of the soul. He's an engineer and an author both, as writers were called engineers of souls by Stalin. Uh, uh, so the question, how literature should respond to the pandemic, how writers should respond to the pandemic in a digital age, how writers should represent the pandemic, how should they deal with this crisis, is a challenging question that all of us are going to answer today, our panelists will answer today. And when I think of the relation between pandemic and literature, I'm reminded of the first text of Western literature, that is Homer's Iliad. And there, pandemic emerges as an important backdrop. Even in Indian context, we are in Orissa, in Bhubaneswar, and Fakir Mohan Senapati is a celebrated author here. His first short story was Revati. Revati is celebrated as the first short story in the Oriya language and literature, and it deals with the theme of pandemic. It was set in the backdrop of cholera, in the context of cholera, where a girl is taught, and it seems, so some people believe in the family, that because the family decided to educate a female child, all the family members die one by one. So pandemic, and I'm also reminded of, these are random examples, but I'm also reminded of U.R. Ananthamurthy, who at the University of Birmingham had done his PhD under Malcolm Bradbury, and they went to watch a film called The Seventh Seal by Bergman. And he was so inspired, so moved after watching the representation of the plague in the film, that memories of childhood came flooding back, and he decided to write Sanskar. And within a week, within 10 days, he finished writing the novel that went on to become a classic. So the first question that I'll pose to Rakshanda Jalil ma'am is that as a writer, as a literary critic, as a writer, as a translator, how did you deal with the pandemic? I mean, what is your response? How should writers deal with the pandemic?
Yeah.
What is the future?
You know, Lalit, I hear all these stories about people being very prolific during the pandemic and having produced this, that, the other. I must say, speaking for myself, I'm usually quite active and I managed to put in a fair amount of writing. But I think there was a fair amount of wretchedness and anxiety and worry and misery all around. I myself got the COVID rather badly, and so that was a long spell of time of not doing anything and a very long recovery. So, on any given day during those lockdown and the pandemic, I must say I didn't do as much work as I would have ordinarily. But just before the pandemic, I had signed this contract with HarperCollins to translate the collected works of Gulzar Saab, and this is about 754 poems. I think the pandemic gave me the leisure and the occasion to read all of them at one go and then to start translating them and not to have a very cluttered plate and not be doing various other things. The interesting cross section of the pandemic induced solitude and technology gave me a very memorable occasion. There are 7 books in the collected works. I would complete working on one book, which would be, let's say, maybe 200 pages, send it by email to Gulzar Sab. He would take a printout and go over every word, every line of my translation. And then he was new to technology and he was finding his feet. And he didn't have his usual office to help him. But somehow or the other, we managed to connect every day, either on a Zoom call or on FaceTime or whatever, and speak to each other, he in Bombay and I in Delhi. And that was a not only a memorable experience, but a very enriching one because I've never had the experience of working on my translations with a living poet. I mean, the people I've translated either know more or they're not very invested in the translation. So here was a person who was not only invested but had a lot of sensible ideas. And translating with the poet, and this is something, Ranjit, perhaps you might appreciate being a poet yourself. Those of us who are not poets ourselves, I mean, we are hard, you guys are hardwired differently. I think there's something in your DNA. You see syntax differently, which the rest of us who work in prose do not. So, knocking off a word here and doing this in real time. Had he just crossed it out and sent it to me by mail, and had I looked at them later, it would have been a different experience. But this was so live. This was, and it was a learning experience for me. So I think that was my big takeaway from the pandemic.
Thank you. So you could manage to make good use of that time and do some constructive work too. But do you think, as an author, that new literary forms are going to emerge because of the pandemic? Maybe you and Rajesh ji will be able to talk about this from the perspective of an author. Because these days, flash fiction, 6 word fiction, Twitter fiction, 6 शब्दों में कहानियां लिखी जा रही हैं, 1 gun, 2 shots, 3 dead. Earlier, also, such kind of stories were being written. For instance, Hemingway's 6 word fiction, uh, For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn, was quite popular. But these days, we see this tendency in the younger generation to read shorter and shorter fiction. And I was talking to a publisher friend of mine. He said that it's a challenge to sell books these days, all of us know. And my distinguished panelists from the publishing industry will be able to talk about the challenges.
Given all the leisure, I would have thought epics would come out of it, ballads would come out of it. Everybody had time. So, and there was this, enforced solitude, being indoors. तो मुझे तो ये लगता है लोगों को लंबी कविता, लंबी कहानी, बड़ी नॉवेल्स लिखनी चाहिए थी. शॉर्ट फिक्शन की मुझे लॉजिक नहीं समझ में आया.
As an author, sir, what's your take on this?
As an author, you just said that the readers today like short fiction. Shorter the better, actually. Yeah. But I don't know. I don't know if there is any empirical evidence of that. Whether readers like short fiction. I think the writers, for their own convenience, believe that that readers like short fiction, small fiction, 100 word, 100 pages book, and therefore they condition themselves to also write accordingly. That is one thought that comes to my mind. Now, regarding the length, I don't really think you've given flash fiction. You talked about flash fiction. So I don't think as a reader, I would speak as a writer. I don't think writers should be concerned about these formats: flash fiction, short fiction, long fiction, non-fiction, fiction, semi-fiction, whatever. I think we just need to write without bothering ourselves or trying to categorize ourselves. I'll just give you a personal example. My first book was published by Rupa, which was Portraits of Hindutva from Harappa to Ayodhya. Right. Now, that book was, I'll just take a couple of minutes quickly to make my point. That was discussed at one of the reputed think tanks in Delhi. And a participant there told me, oh, this book is really good. Now you should write another book on Ved Vyas. Everybody writes about Tulsidas. What about Vyas? The Mahabharata, the composer of Vedas. No, why did he say that to me? Because in his mind he had categorized me as a certain kind of a writer. So he said, now you should write after portraits of Hindu तो आप वेद व्यास पे लिखिए फिर कुछ और similar thing पे लिखिए. So I nodded my head politely, but I did not write. And I wrote Bahubalis of Indian politics. Very different from that. Again, so the point I'm making is that as an author, I am not. Now I might look, I might sound a little immodest or even arrogant, but as an author, I feel that I must write what satisfies me and gives me pleasure first and foremost. I'm not beholden to any reader or my or even the publisher. So pandemic or no pandemic, that principle remains. But to just quickly to come to your question, what how did it affect the writing uh, inputs? Again, we were discussing this, and I will not name the politician. Writing poetry on your mobile and then getting it published. I can't believe this. Then I am Dom Moraes. I will not name him. You might. I have no comments on that. But but I don't know. But if this is the example of a pandemic creating writers, then I would rather not be writing.
Thank you so much. In many instances, we see that market forces are the ones which determine the content of writing. And at times, writers are forced to imagine implied readers, and accordingly, they write. But I am glad that you write for the sake of pleasure. That's yeah. Money sweetens the fruit of labor, of course. Money always sweetens the fruit of labor. Yeah. And as a writer, now I'll request Sudipto ji to talk about his experiences. As a writer, do you have implied readers in your mind? Do you have this anxiety that now the age-old relation that a reader had with the book, that feeling the texture of the book, the tangibility of the book, that gives a different kind of rapport. But with the pace in which things are being digitized, digital market may grow, is growing, and at what rate does it grow is going to grow will be answered by the panelists from publishing industry. But what's your take on that?
No. I think my answer might be a little unauthorish, right? So, I mean, there have been a lot of criticism about this digital thing about books or entertainment. I think in the last 20, 30 years, right? The entire publishing industry, whether it is for movies, whether it's for sitcoms or music industry, like all the form of art has undergone huge changes, right? And there are pros and cons, and then I think one thing I mean hear again and again, right, that human touch is getting missing, right? I mean the touch and feel of a book, right? But one thing, a big eye opener for me during pandemic, like me and I mean few of my friends, we started a small initiative to help. Oh hi. So I mean during the pandemic, I mean few of my friends, right? I mean we started a small initiative to help the migrant laborers, right? And that's when we I mean figured out, right? Interesting thing that had there not been this I mean digital format or this ebooks, right? I think I mean a lot of I mean villages, right, where I mean getting physical books is an issue, wouldn't have I mean been educated, right? I mean I feel that very silently this I mean digital thing has brought a very social revolution, right? Like people who cannot go to a library, people who cannot actually buy books, right? Now they're having the ebooks everywhere, right? So I cannot say for the literature as such because I don't have any data, right? Like uh, you know uh, there is no proper peer reviewed article written, and I haven't come across any empirical data which says that the literature is going bad. But at least from the social point of view, I can say that the digital thing has it has actually democratized literature or knowledge. Like the same thing, Mintra and Flipkart, right? Their biggest markets are tier 2 and tier 3 cities, because they're the people of aspiration. Like they're aspirational, right? Likewise, I feel books which couldn't have reached, the readers are now reaching. So for me, I think, uh, pandemic or no pandemic, right? I think the digitization of books or and whatever, right? I mean, that has actually democratized knowledge and everything, wisdom, right? Whether it's music, right? So that is my take.
Thank you so much for associating digitization with democratization. Uh, I think the same kind of democratization was felt in the field of literature when print technology came. And I was talking to Rachandaji moments ago that when we look at the history of writing, we look at all kinds of transition. First, there was a shift from orality to a scribal culture, manuscript culture, and then also people had anxieties. And then from manuscript culture to print culture, when printing press came, many people resisted it. In fact, there were many Sanskrit Pandits who did not want to share the manuscripts with the British explorers, Europeans, because they considered the text manuscript too sacred to be printed. And the same kind of democratization you associate digitization now with. But what are the challenges that we face when we see that digitization has become the norm? Do publishers feel that the marketing can be a huge problem, selling of books can be a huge problem? Is it going to profit the industry, publication industry, or they are running at a loss? From the perspective of a publisher, how do you look at the whole thing, Vaishali ji?
Actually, you can hear me, right? Yeah. Actually, I think pandemic में क्या हुआ कि we all, there were problems which are imagined and there were problems which were real. That sees the publisher and also the booksellers. So it sort of forced us to think of new ways of reaching to the readers. तो मुझे लगता है अच्छी चीज ये हुई पैंडमिक के दौरान कि सब पब्लिशर्स ये सोचने लगे कि हमारा रीडर कौन है, हम उसके लिए क्या कर सकते हैं कि वो पढ़े. हाउ डू वी फाइंड आउट हु इज आवर रीडर एंड व्हाट where which are the platforms your reader is at, and so it became very focused towards the readers, the market, the way we realigned our teams, everything went digital. And also a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people didn't I mean at least got 15 days where they weren't doing anything at all and they didn't know where their job was going to go. So we had a lot of pressure from them saying कि मैंने manuscript तब किया था, and there would be constant follow-ups. So for us, like it was a very pressured time. अगर आज किताब दी है तो कल क्यों नहीं आ गई? And then there was just like too many things logistically. But the nicest thing I would say is happened to a lot of authors. A lot of them, of course, could not write because mentally they were in a not a good place. I mean, this was pandemic. We say pandemic, but it was a disease, right? People were getting infected and people were scared. They were not in a place to write. So a lot of authors didn't write. But a lot of them, like I'm reminded of Sri Narendra Kohli, who I think wrote about 6 books during the pandemic. And उनके संग क्या हुआ कि वो he was born in बार बार उनका बायो में लिखते थे कि वो सियालकोट पाकिस्तान में पैदा हुए थे. तो वो हर बार कहते थे कि भाई जब मैं पैदा हुआ तब तो पाकिस्तान था ही नहीं, तो मैं सियालकोट में नहीं पैदा हुआ था, मैं सागलकोट में पैदा हुआ था जो मध्य देश की राजधानी थी. तो उसका एक अपना इतिहास है उस जगह का और वहाँ पे उस इतिहास के चिन्ह है उस जगह पे. देयर आर प्लेसेस that actually talk about that historical context, those buildings, those monuments, those things are there. So we got time to talk and I told him कि सर आप हर बार ये बात बोलते हैं, आप ऐसी एक किताब क्यों नहीं निकालते जिसमें आप ये बता सकें कि इसका क्या मतलब था. So we actually brought out a book called Sagalkot, which came out of this whole pandemic. And unfortunately, we lost Kohli ji because of COVID. But उनकी ये lasting एक कृति हमारे पास है, उनकी ये किताब अब हमारे पास है. So I would like to remember that this was the time where we actually started thinking about our readers, which is the best thing to do. We actually started thinking deeply. We became more focused, and out of this chaos एक सागर मंथन टाइप का हो गया, उसमें से a lot of good things came out. And I think that need to be and feel has grown. And like somebody was saying yesterday in a panel that so many literature festivals are happening and they're happening back to back, and I think it's great. The atmosphere is great right now. And if some great literature has to come out of the pandemic, then it won't happen immediately after the pandemic. It is going to take some time for any author to process what happened at this period of time, and then I think those bigger epics that Rachanda ji are talking is talking about will probably come out. So we're still going through it, right? That's that. Those are my thoughts.
No, that's true. We need some time before the dust of the pandemic settles down, or else how problematic it would have been for people who were living in isolation during the lockdown. And even in the lockdown, they would have read about the pandemic. That would have been really depressing. So only time will tell whether the genre of pandemic literature will emerge, it will thrive. But from the perspective of a marketing professional, uh, since you are into promoting books and the marketing books, so in this transitional phase, what are the challenges that you feel when you try to promote a book, market a book?
See, being a mark. Hello. Yeah. Audible. Firstly, good afternoon. Right after lunch, I know it's quite difficult for people to stay awake, so we'll try to keep it as precise and concise as possible. Being a marketer, I feel. Let me just bring in a little more perspective and widen your question a bit. Uh, so, I've always felt that publishing overall as an industry has been very slow to change. And we struggle when it comes to innovation. We struggle when it comes to executing new ideas. And pandemic was a very strong wake-up call for us, all of us, to realize that during that particular phase of transition, if we don't start reinventing and reinventing very aggressively, we are going to continue to slowly and gradually not die out, but maybe not uh, be able to sustain any growth. So I think, as a marketer and coming from a sales, and I'll give in some sales perspective and distribution perspective, pandemic was the time when for a very brief period of time, suddenly everything stopped. And publishers woke up to the fact that, ebooks is the only option for them to continue at least being in the business for a little while, because they weren't sure what's happening next, what's going to happen next. Uh, but so there was a slight surge seen in ebooks, and uh, and then by the time the second phase hit, I think the markets opened up slightly. They all started reworking on the strategies on how much to print, what titles to bring out in this current situation, not really packing it up the way they usually used to with 200 new titles. They reduced the number of titles, but they continued to fight it out and sustain, For a marketer and someone who has seen both sides of it, being inside a publishing house and now running something of my own, it was great for my business, because marketers, I think, are trained to uh, be at the top of leading that change, and I think the more agile you are when something really strikes you that hard is when you are able to come up with great ideas and implement them. So that was the time a lot of writers sought help, because suddenly they were not sure कि events बंद हो गए हैं. The regular traditional way of marketing books had completely come to a standstill. So that was the time when marketers actually led it in a lot of ways, in the sense trying to innovate and reinvent and bring out ways and think of new ideas to put the book out there, because there's always a reader, and especially pandemic gave quite a few people a lot more time at hand to read. So how to connect your author with your reader, pandemic in a way worked pretty well for at least small businesses like us, where a lot of writers sought help A lot of publishers sought help to find ways to, come out of this totally roadblock situation. So I think that's all. I mean, just to put it in perspective of pandemic, so to say. But post pandemic, I think things are have quickly got back to normal, and we've seen that this year with loads of festivals that have come up. Uh, uh, and I do hope, because at the end of the day, a physical interaction with an author always works far better than a virtual one. And I think we see that uh, that interest being revived, through these festivals and through these interactions and platforms that give this opportunity again to readers. So I think it's looking very positive. I'm a perpetual optimist. So I mean, you'll never hear anything which, but yeah, that's about it on this particular question.
Yes, Vaishali ji.
I also feel that poetry as a genre was flagging a little, and pandemic sort of gave it. I remember Ranjit attending a lot of your sessions on Instagram, and it was soul soothing. You know, there was something about that time period that only poetry could help. Only recitations, only listening, just brought you a lot of peace. So I feel really happy about the fact that as publishers, we are able to commission more and more poetry into our lists.
Add to that, I think it's a misconception that flash fiction and quick fiction and shorter pieces are have become popular. In fact, if you pick up the data, huge non-fiction has shown much better sales. So it's not like it was a time when only fiction sold and people are looking at only quickly. I mean, getting a quick read. In fact, I feel that the genuine readers, have started going back to long forms. They prefer that now, and the data speaks to you. Not It's not out of my own assumption. The data is such.
That's a good sign. That's a positive sign, and then perpetually optimistic. In fact, someone said on a lighter note that the definition of a perpetual optimist is that. I mean, in fact, he gave me an example that one man, while falling down from the 70th floor of a building, while falling down each floor down, he said, "So far, so good." But our condition is different. Now, my question to Rakshanda ji, and I am sure that from the perspective of marketing professionals, Vaishali ji and Lipika ji will be able to address this question. What is the future of books? Book as a hard object. Because I think, ma'am, it may be too early to ask this question, but I think when print technology was introduced to a country like India, no one would have imagined back then that soon manuscript culture will go away. It will vanish. So, do you think that 20 years down the line, everything is going to be digitized? Though it's a good thing also, I was told by some friends that many Oriya periodicals have been digitized now. So now Oriya scholars, those who are working on Oriya print, they have access to Utkal Deepika and all the Oriya periodicals. But what's the future of hard copy of the book from the perspective of an author? What do you?
Yesterday, I had the occasion to go to a newly opened museum. In fact, it will be officially inaugurated today in Cuttack. It's called the Museum of Justice. And there they have located and managed to collect records, manuscripts related to justice, because this is a legal museum, going back to several centuries. They have scanned and digitized them, and where possible, preserved them. So I'm all for doing it for the past, but I'm not entirely sure I want to do it for the present and the future. I think the past needs that help. I don't see why we need to give this crutch to the present, and I'm not entirely sure that we need it for the future. I mean, speaking for myself, there is a pleasure in the physical handling of a book, and that is not to be found in Kindle or reading something on your phones and screens. So, but this is a subjective opinion. Also, I don't see books going away anywhere in a hurry. I think they've been with us for a very long time, and I don't see them sort of pandemic or no going away.
You want me to? Yeah, very quick response. you asked what is the future of the print version of the book. Rakshanda has already said that, and I agree with her that the physical edition is not going to go away anywhere soon. See, we remember when newspapers went digital, everybody said, "Arey, ab to newspaper koi nahi kharidega. You can just." People are still buying. It's a matter of habit, largely. So people will buy. But Lalit, I should accuse you of of something. You asking what is going to happen to the book. You should be asking what is going to happen to the author. I mean, why don't you people? There are nobody. They're all publishers here. So the author is in the minority here. So what is going to happen to the author is the answer to what is going to happen to the book. If you get the author in the right slot, you make him comfortable, pandemic or no pandemic, you will get the right book. And then you get the right book, you will always have the right audience, the right readers, everything falls into place. Technology is only a medium. Whether you have Kindle, you have physical copies, you have e-books, you have what are those called, audiobooks, all of that will be there, and some of them will proceed further, will progress more, but eventually the balance between the writer and the publisher is most important, because only then does can the writer communicate with the with the audience. So I think that also should be taken into consideration. That's my opinion.
Uh, uh, I, I think yes, I mean, authors will, of course, like keep on writing, right? And on the medium, whether it's digital or physical, see, I mean, I am in favor of paperless thing, right? Because actually that helps the environment, right? I mean, the amount of, you know, even newspaper print, right? I mean, like huge. I mean, I've read some paper, right? So just the newspaper, the amount of energy and resources it gobbles across the world. It's, I mean, humongous, right? I mean, when we are all thinking about so many things, right? I think it's a matter of convenience and also our resolution, right? I mean, if we want to, a little bit improve, like the art for a future. For future generation, right? I think we have to move away from physical. I mean, things like physical books, newspapers, all those things, right? So more and more being paperless, it helps, right? But again, I believe, I mean, I personally, that the smell of the book, the touch of the book, it's good. I mean, I think my generation cannot forget that. But my son, he, I mean, from the first Harry Potter to the last one, he all read it as ebooks, right? So I believe for the next generations, that nostalgia might not be there, right? So and I'm fine with that. The author of Harry Potter will remain, whether the physical books remain or not, right? And I think publishers have to also change, right? I mean, it sort of wonders me that why the ebook had to come from Amazon, right? I mean, why it didn't come from a conventional publishing house, right? And also the same thing, right? Why the biggest film producer now has to be Netflix or Amazon, right? I mean, why the conventional film producers like the 20th Century Fox or other who have been making movies for 100 years, why they couldn't change? And same with music industry, right? So I believe every publishing house has to also change and reintrospect and be relevant, right? Otherwise, every time some Amazon, some Netflix will come and then we replace the conventional houses, and actually there's a danger, right? I mean, Netflix has, as a film producer, right, has only limited experience, where Columbia Pictures have been making movies for so long, and same with publishing houses, right? Sort of the acumen, the knowledge which they had, which they have within them, and Amazon or somebody else, it cannot replace. But still, when they try to do that, obviously the quality might come down. Or I mean, there are other socio, like economical and psychological impacts, right? So I believe the conventional publishing houses have to also reinvent, which I feel. I mean, not only in publishing, but I mean, for me, literature is one form of art. All producers of all form of art have undergone huge changes, right? But I believe, again, to I mean, reinforce, right? The creator of art will remain. I mean, irrespective of the medium. I mean, that is my, I think, I mean,
Rakshanda ji put it on a lighter note. Poor will remain poor. Okay. No, I'm glad that you talked about the way in which art forms are being changed. But some people say that digital literacy is a huge problem in India. So the democratization that you talk about, the paperless society. So we do not know the data. Okay, data shows otherwise. But still, many people claim that we are still years away from a time when everyone will have access to e-books, will be able to have access to internet, computer.
See,
Cell phone is
India,
a different thing altogether. Phone is a different thing.
see, India is a huge country, right? The amount of digitization that India has undergone is huge. I believe the sheer facts and figures are humongous, right? It will take time, right? I mean, India cannot be 100% digitized in a day, but the pace at which India is being digitized, I think, every village to have an ebook reader, like, would be very far. So that is my, at least on the facts and figures which I have access to. I mean, I'm perpetually optimistic about this fact.
So we have two perpetual optimists today on this panel, or maybe more. Perpetual optimists. Yeah.
Um, what will happen to the book? I mean, future is not for us to predict. But what we can do about things that we want to do. So one thing I feel is that people look at development as like this sharply rising curve, but I feel that development is always cyclical. So I feel that when things suddenly start changing, they start changing. Uh, in this thing, if we are not, if we, I don't want to get into predicting what is the future of the book, but what I want to talk about is what I want to do as a publisher. As a publisher, I want to support physical books. As a publisher, I want people to buy more physical books. As a publisher, we are also getting into the recycling of paper because the more you produce, I think that is also a concern for the environment. So we've got, Penguin has got into a phase where we are doing 100% using 100% recycled paper. So that is one of the things that we are also looking at. So there are several aspects to the business this thing, but yes, I am for the publishers, and I know that Barisans happened in, I think, two bookstores in Delhi during this time. So that is something to say. And the small bookstores thought deeply about their readers because they're connected. Single bookstores, family owned bookstores, these people know their readers, and they gave such a huge fight to all the big chain stores that now Crossword has rethought of its policies. So it's got smaller stores, curated stores in different parts of the city. So I think that we have a great future ahead for the physical book as well, provided we are all in it together. And so let's see how many people are sitting here physically and how many people are there online, right? The idea, all authors I saw came on different digital forums because they wanted to reach out to their readers. The idea is for an author to reach out. So, Rajeshji, we are all absolutely with you. All publishers thought of all the authors who were not able to get on digital platforms. So we thought deeply and we worked hard on getting the publicity of the book across, as well as Lipika pointed out. So we are all working towards it, and the point is, what do we want to do? We cannot predict the future, and we don't know what can change overnight. So here's what we are going to do. I'm going to support the bookstores. I'm not going to support Amazon, honestly. I don't. I have not bought a thing from Amazon in these years. And we also supported small industries. We supported people working from their small setups. So we are going to promote the books. We are going to promote the booksellers, and we want that to happen. So let's make that happen instead of wondering what is going to happen in the future.
That's so true. One quick word from Lipika ji.
See, I don't know why we are talking about this in terms of. I mean, there's always a constant fear over the last 15 years of my career that will the print book go out of circulation? It will not. When the ebook culture came into the West, in the US and UK, and this is something that I shared yesterday as well. Uh, it was a very short period of time that saw a huge interest in ebooks, and suddenly, W.H. Smith and everybody else started shutting shops, thinking that now, oh, the ebooks have taken over, or any digitized version has taken over, and we'll go out of jobs or out of business. But if you see, there was a balance that came in, and the fashion for the interest in owning a physical book even after having read it in the digitized form increased. So I don't think we need to move out of this fear that there'll be the physical books will go out of circulation. What we should rather be discussing is that every new, and here I would like to maybe I mean, I do not agree with Vaishali as much, because when Flipkart came in India, which was the first online seller before even Amazon came in to India. We all feared that the physical stores will go out of circulation. That was every change, as I said, is for every business person. It's a moment of reinventing. Today we have physical stores, as Vaishali mentioned, coming up, which are more popular, because after the pandemic, people want to connect physically with people. They want to connect with co-readers. They want to go and buy and hear out suggestions of people, not just coming from a perspective of a writer or a publisher, but from a regular reader. So that's a place to connect more than, I don't think we should be discussing this. Even yesterday, I felt that, it is too, it's better to rather discuss on how we can make the most of all the forms that are coming in, how we can do better in terms of getting the maximum out of ebooks, how we can do better in terms of conversion of books into different forms, like visual forms or audio forms, how we can do better in terms of audio, because there's a growing audience for every kind of content that's coming out. There's a growing audience. The consumption is only increasing, and the interest in the origin, which is the physical book, will only increase with time. That's what I feel.
Thank you so much thank you so much for pointing this out from the perspective of a strategist, marketing strategist. In fact, whenever new art forms come, whenever new technologies are introduced, there is this anxiety. When computers were introduced in India, people had a similar kind of anxiety, but we will continue to remain, what you said, ultimate optimists. Thank you so much. I want to thank profusely my eminent panelists and the audience from the core of my heart. Thank you so much.